Really up here.
Definitely need a new vice chair.
You're all alone there too. No. BO.
Center of attention.
I'm on out on a limb here. So one of us has gotta. Back to being vice chair, right? Because all
Yeah.
have turn back,
Right.
John or I, right? Because you're not doing it.
And now we need two people too. To
I
recruit
know.
for. And so if you have any
Thanks.
suggestions.
Listen, believe me, I'm talking or anything that I talk to who seems at least interested in the affairs of the city. Stuff, right?
Especially this, as you well know, that time commitment.
It is.
It's amazing.
It is.
that we- that's many people.
It is.
Yeah, little did you know, we suckered you in for what?
That mayor check, I tell you. Oh, you know, you just don't send you something. You don't look at it.
And I think for talking to Chuck, it is, there's been more and more big projects.
Yeah, I mean, it's ever since the city was brought in Berkeley, we said we're gonna start
Yeah. right.
changing how
That's
some things are done. Yep, so yeah, it's. You wanna have my I enjoy it. I enjoy it. Sure. Done here. Arnie. You need some extras.
Yeah, is Matt?
Is Matt coming?
Oh, Matt, he's not coming.
He is as far as I know.
Okay, good. Know what happens if he doesn't come? No. Item C.
Very, very easy decision.
It's his turn.
Motion already?
There we go. Speak of the king.
There we go.
Hey.
There we are, and he appears.
Now
we're complete.
Good to see you. Thank you.
All right, welcome, everybody. It's 5 p.m. Thank you for coming to the Lexington Planning Commission December 8th meeting. First item is call to order, and now we will approve the agenda.
I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great, thank you. And the next is approval of the minutes from the November 10th meeting. Any comments, clarifications on that?
Excellent summary as usual. Motion to accept the minutes as approved,
Second.
submitted.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Need a second. Can you get
I-
us-
So,
Oh,
yes, I-
Pat did. Thank you. All right. Moving on to the next item is citizens' comments on matters not on the agenda. Do we have anybody who'd like to speak now? Seeing none, we'll close that item and now move directly to the first item of new business. First item of new business is a conditional use permit 2023-01, an application by Edwin Gaskin of Echelon Resources Incorporated for approval of a conditional use permit to allow multifamily dwellings on the city-owned parcel located on Spotswood Drive, tax map number 29-1-31. And we will start with the staff report, have an applicant statement, and have time for public comment. But go ahead, Arnie.
Good evening to you all. The subject application is a request for a conditional use permit to allow multifamily dwellings in the RLC zoning district. The applicant's proposal envisions a multifamily community consisting of up to 62 apartments with related amenities and at least 84 parking spaces. The plan proposes 62 units of new construction and 1 and 2 bedroom units, with the massing of the proposed structure located closer to the Rara parcel to the east. Locating the proposed structure to the east side of the subject parcel increases the distance to the adjacent single-family parcels along Houston Street and Spotswood Drive to the west and northwest. Proposed structure will be 3 full stories in height, with the basement story facing Spotswood Drive. Maximum building height will not exceed 45 feet in height. On that first page of your staff report, you see a photograph there of the parcel as it is, at least seen from Spotswood Drive. Page number 2, you have a location and zoning map. Parcel is outlined in yellow there, zoned RLC, as are the adjacent RARA building and the medical office to the south. Across the street, we have the Oak Grove Cemetery, which is zoned parks and open space. And then on the sort of northwest and west sides, we have single family properties zoned R1. There's a concept plan on the bottom of the second page there. And the applicant has provided perhaps more information than we would typically receive in a conditional use permit, not quite to the site plan stage, which also allows me the opportunity to mention that after the conditional use permit, there will still be a site plan that comes to you for review and approval. The applicant also offered a number of conditions, and those are listed on page 3 of your report, numbers 1 through 11. I won't go through those. And the staff report also provided you with the RLC intent and purpose section. And that first sentence, just as an example, says residential light commercial district was established to provide areas where housing can be located adjacent to or in conjunction with light commercial operations compatible in nature with residential land use. Talks about the maximum number of units. And then one of the other sentences in there up on the first part of page 4, regulations applicable to this district provide that single-family dwellings and multi-family dwellings, such as apartment houses, townhouses, garden apartments, etc., may be developed in appropriate areas well located with respect to major roads, shopping facilities, and employment centers. Next section, and please interrupt if you have any questions. The next section is just some comprehensive plan language. Subject parcel is designated on the future land use map as a mixed-use neighborhood and as an opportunity area. Mixed-use neighborhood is intended to be a transitional zone between downtown commercial uses and other uses. These sites are adjacent to other land uses and not isolated in the siting and architecture of infill development must meet the context of nearby buildings in design, density, and character. Mixed-use neighborhoods are appropriate for higher density residential uses, such as apartments and townhouses. Our opportunity areas direct us that new development, infill, and redevelopment are expected to be focused within opportunity areas. And this is one of our 5 opportunity areas, this parcel specifically. Building height, we have a definition of building height that directs the height to be measured at the front door from adjacent grade to the highest point of the building. The front door for this property is sort of not at the front property line along Spotswood. It's up into the parking lot and towards the more of the interior. So that is where we would measure building height, and they are within the requirements of building height. Building height in the RLC can be 35 feet in height, but up to 45 feet in height if you provide a little bit larger side yard setbacks, and those larger side yard setbacks are provided.
Arnie, can I ask a question? And I know we talked about what the requirement is for building height. Is the actual building height, even on, say, the backside of what's visible, still at 45 and under? It looked like that was the case from the drawings.
It will be 45, and we can go back through, but if I remember correctly, the largest part of the building that you will see from Spotswood is 45 feet in height.
Mhm.
So you think that that is consistent with the definition, but we also have to remember that there will be a few mechanical units on the roof up to about 44 inches in height. So it'll be 45 feet plus about 44 or 48 inches additional on top of that. I highly doubt that they're going to be close to the front, so you're not going to see them. But I had to mention that within that height, there are also mechanical units that will be placed on the roof that are counted towards height.
Thank you.
So Arnie, can I ask a question? We're defining the front door based on what is being provided to us, what they're defining as the front door, as opposed to the door that's at the street level, which is, it looks like there are gonna be apartments down there. And I'm on page something. The applicant's statement, it's page 27 of, I think, of the documents of the packet.
Okay.
So 2 things is why is the building height not from the door that's down here to one of the apartments versus the 3 floors from the door at the level at which they built, which is, I mean, which they're describing as their front door. Why is that? I mean, I just don't, I really don't know. I don't understand how we choose one versus the other.
For building height, it says our ordinance defines it as the height as the vertical distance measured from the adjoining grade at the front entrance of the building or structure to the highest point of the structure. So the front entrance in this case is how they've designed it. Their main entrance to the building is that point that's up higher on the property and not their main entrance. Sorry, their main entrance is not designed in this location for this property coming off of Spotswood. They have a couple of, I would call them ancillary entry and exit points, but that is not their main entrance.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions on building height?
But, well, I'm still a little confused too. Just on page 27 again, it looks like that it's measuring from the lowest part of the building you can see to the top is 45 feet, right? You see over to the side, like the main door, the part of the building where it says signage, right?
Mhm.
From the floor of that to the top is less than 45 feet. Over to the left, that where looks to be lower, from that lowermost point to the very top is 45 feet. Am I looking at this correctly?
I wish I'd blown this up to a larger scale, but if I'm reading this and remembering it correctly, that it's 35 feet on the right-hand side. So that
Yeah,
parking elevation with the signage,
yeah.
does that not say 35 feet on
Yeah,
the
that's-
right-hand side?
Yeah, that's 35 feet, right? So that part, that's like their main, they're putting that as their main front, and that's only 35 feet. It's the part to the left
That gets
up,
45
gets up to
feet.
45 because it has that basement area.
Correct.
And so that's still within,
No, but it's on the right. The reason it's what's not being shown here is they're leaving, they say 35 on the right, or maybe it goes up to 39, but they're leaving some space for mechanicals.
Yeah,
They're gonna
right.
sit on the top. So
Right.
really, on the right, it is up to 45.
Mhm.
Because if you account for, and the description of
Right.
building height says accounting for including mechanicals.
Right.
So I mean, I see your point, but I don't know where you're measuring, I mean, how you measure this from, but you're saying that you measure it because it fits the code, I think, if you let somebody else define what the building front is, and which may be the right front, but it's interesting.
Mhm.
So. Do you see what I'm saying, Pat?
Right, yeah. What they're considering the basement is the part closest to Spotswood. It's the lowest part of the property. And from the floor of the basement to the top of the roof, they're defining as 45 feet. But the front entrance, which is again, is going to be behind the building, closer to, if you're going perpendicular to like Walker Street, that is the front of the building because that's where the entrance of the building is. And so that's the 35 foot. So you're right. It's designing the building around how the landscape is. And so if that's where the front of the building is, that's where that's.
Though it's somewhat moot because they're still within 45 feet even at the worst, except
Right.
for maybe the 40 inches for the mechanical,
Okay.
well within the height
right,
requirement.
that's kind of my point, is that at any point of it, it's all of it. What doesn't matter where you put the front door or say it's all within the height requirement.
Okay, I get that. I see that now because it just, when I was looking at it on my computer, it was, these numbers just weren't making sense, but now I see what you're saying. Okay,
Do we have a sense of where the mechanical units will be placed? To
The applicant is going to be better able to answer that, but he did indicate that mechanical units up to 44 inches in height also need to be put on the roof. And in most cases if they're going to be, well, actually, in most cases, they can be put towards the middle for the most part, so that they won't be easily seen from Spotswood.
So it sounds like there's a potential that they could be over the 45 feet, depending where they're put, or under the 45 feet?
They're going to be under the 45
Be
feet
under, okay.
comfortably,
Okay,
the way we measure. Now, this is a good discussion in that part, if there is a need for maybe a zoning text amendment, if measuring at the front door, but we can always bring that up at a later point. But at this point, it's at least my determination that they are meeting the height requirements as we have the height defined.
does staff have a recommendation on this?
Yes.
You do, okay,
I'll get to that. I'll say that.
okay.
For the off-street parking requirements, I'm not going to get into that in detail, other than to say that they meet the parking requirements that we have for multifamily units. Perhaps the most important thing for your consideration are the conditions for issuance on page 5 of your report that you have for each conditional use permit. Planning Commission shall find that A, the proposed use will not affect adversely the health or safety of persons residing or working in the neighborhood of the proposed use. B, the proposed use will not be detrimental to public welfare or unduly injurious to property values or improvements in the neighborhood. C, proposed use will not be in conflict with the policies and principles of the city's adopted comprehensive plan. And D, adequate public services, including streets and other traffic ways, utilities, police and fire protection are or reasonably will be available to support the proposed use. And following each one of those in italics, I have, at least for what it's worth, my comments or staff's comments for each of those. And then
Just a
also,
question about that.
Mhm, sure.
Public welfare, does that mean like water, the water runoff? They have to make sure that the sewers are, they can handle the runoff that's going to be diverted from there. What does public welfare mean? Is that,
that's a general term, health, safety, and welfare of the public.
what, why is it in there? Does it have a meaning?
Zoning ordinance, all zoning requirements are under the police powers. So generally, they are supposed to implement the public's health, safety, and welfare. So you can interpret that a number of different ways. So runoff, for an example, would be if we can channel or direct stormwater runoff, then yes, I think that's in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare.
Okay, so that, okay. Okay. So in other words, it's a very broad
Yes.
term.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And then also just to highlight in number 3, granted the conditional use permit, the governing body shall give due consideration to factors relevant in findings and required in subsection C1 and C2. Those are really about parking and drive-throughs, as well as to any other reasonable land use and zoning considerations as may be required by the nature of the proposal. So sometimes I forget to mention to you, I just sort of highlight A, B, and C and D and don't really mention to you what's in number 3. So please keep those in mind as you're considering this request. Staff does make a recommendation for approval of this, mainly based on my observations to A, B, C, and D that are in your staff report. That's all I have for a presentation. Happy to answer any questions. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot one thing. One thing that I had neglected to put into the staff report is a discussion about about density. And we put together for the consideration of the 4 projects from the 2 development entities. And a while ago when council was considering all 4 proposals, had put together a little zoning analysis for them. And I'd forgotten to bring that forward to you. When we look at our lot requirements table, because we unfortunately do not have a zoning unit of dwelling units per acre measurement. So in RLC or RM, how many multifamily units are allowed per acre? What we do have is a lot area calculation that says multifamily requires 10,000 square feet of lot area plus 1,500 square feet for each unit in excess of 4. So if you do that for 62 units, you come up to a requirement for 97,000 square feet of land area or lot area for 62 units. What's being provided on the subject parcel is 101,494 square feet of lot area. So it meets that requirement. The requirement it does not meet is the requirement for lot width, which says multifamily You have to have 50 feet plus 10 feet for each unit above 4. So if you do that requirement, they are shy of meeting the lot width requirement. I would also pose to you that that is an odd way of having a rule regulation for the number of multifamily units based on lot width only.
What dimension is the width? Is it from Houston to the hospital or from Spotswood to
It's the Spotswood frontage.
Spotswood frontage?
I could not think of, that's the only frontage that it has on a public street.
So what are the dimensions there then? What?
630 feet of frontage would be required, and I can't read my handwriting, but I believe it's 406.44 feet that are provided.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
630 feet of frontage, it would be required for 62 units. And the parcel has a frontage of 406.44 feet. So just to make you aware that it is a little bit shy on the lot width requirement, but again, even though it's in our zoning ordinance, is it something that we should focus on, or maybe even consider an amendment to that? Because if you had a narrow parcel, narrower than this, but it was really deep, you could certainly fit, in my opinion, multifamily dwellings on it. And just relying on the lot frontage is a bit of an odd metric. But I needed to point that out to you. Any other questions?
What's our latitude if that's the ordinance?
I would point you to perhaps two different things. One is that, in which I already have, in that your conditions of issuance. So what are you considering? If it meets A, B, C, and D, and that little portion of number 3, I think it would be comfortable for you, from a legal standpoint, to make a motion for approval. And the other thing is, a conditional use permit is a legislative act. And as I've mentioned before, there's a wide latitude for legislative acts, all the way to the point that even if a conditional use permit met every single requirement in your zoning ordinance, council still has the ability or the right to deny it because of it being a legislative act, and they have wide latitude.
Can I ask another question, a follow-up? I'm going back. What did you all consider when you were evaluating welfare, public welfare? Well, I mean, did you say, what were the things that were going through your mind when you decided that this is just so give me a little bit more perspective on what we mean when we're talking public welfare.
Typically you think of things such as the amount of light that the neighboring properties are going to receive, welfare such as whether or not an excessive amount of traffic is going to be blocking somebody's driveway or parking. So welfare in the sense of zoning rules and regulations, not necessarily welfare in the sense of healthy and happy, but so zoning type rules and regulations.
So is this something that we later on, if we approve this, we'll get a site plan and we'll go through it in more detail, but is this the last chance that we have to say we can evaluate its public welfare component? Or is this something, so in other words, if we go forward and we say, the traffic seems to be good, but then we get to the site plan, we say, the traffic is not a good thing. So, but is it too late then? Do we need to act now is what I'm asking.
No, in the sense that traffic is still a site plan issue. So if it's traffic specific, there's still the ability at that point. But if your question is more that general idea of health, safety, and welfare, it is perhaps better to consider that now, because as you know, once you get to the site plan, it's more of a ministerial act where if it meets the requirements, you should, in most cases, vote to approve that. Conditional use permits are uses that are or can be excuse me. that could potentially have more impacts to them than what you would normally have from a by right use. So for a conditional use, it's just presumed that it has a more of an impact than a by right use in the RLC. And given that, you also have the ability to put conditions on an approval. Excuse me. So this is an opportunity. If you see an issue that needs to be addressed, you have the ability to develop a condition. Now, any condition should be reasonably related to the impacts that you think are occurring or may occur. And then those have to be roughly proportional to what you think the impact may be.
So at this point, so the next step would be ministerial for us as a body. So, but we are allowed to, as opposed to other actions we can take as a planning commission, we are allowed to, at this point, say, we'll approve this with these conditions, and that's legal. That's something we can
Right.
do.
You may be thinking about rezonings and conditional rezonings where the applicant has to provide them. There's really not a whole lot of negotiation, and you vote those up or down just based on how our legal status is at the moment with conditional rezonings. This is not a conditional rezoning. This is a special exception or a conditional use permit. And in those cases, you do have the ability to come up with and adopt condition or recommend conditions that are reasonably related to the impacts to be addressed. And the extent of the conditions must be roughly proportional to the impacts.
Remind me why is this site not considered possible implementation of like PDMU or like the new, a new?
We haven't quite adopted that, but in the current PUD, we wouldn't be, we're not at the 3 acre minimum. And also that was more for commercial uses. And I believe that the residential uses would not be permitted in that current PUD, if I'm remembering correctly.
And the new version of the PDMU is just not ready for.
One, it's not ready, and it's also for 2 other opportunity areas, not for this opportunity area.
Oh, okay.
Plus there's no mixed use in this at all.
Right. There is no,
Right.
there's
So
definitely
it
no mixed
doesn't-
use, but
right, so-
it was always like we hope that there's mixed
Right.
use,
Right.
but it was, anyways, I just
Yeah.
was.
That does,
instead-
sorry, that does lead me to add one more thing, if that's okay. The applicant did have an option, and the option is to either in the residential light commercial existing zoning district to apply for a conditional use permit for multifamily, or to rezone the property to RM, residential multifamily. And then we would have to look at the potential conditions if there were any offered with that. And then also, how does that fit with a comprehensive plan? Applicant chose to go forward with a conditional use permit for RLC.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I looked at the requirements and for multifamily, it doesn't make any difference. The density would be
Yeah.
the same. And the lot dimensions
Yep,
would be.
The width would
That's
be the
correct.
same as well.
So it'd be more about process than about product.
Since we're talking about A through D especially, I had a question about the standard question we ask is, has the fire marshal approved the site plan?
The concept plan was reviewed by the fire marshal. He had no comments. Public Works also reviewed and had no comments other than a minor comment about utilities, and that will be answered during the site plan phase.
And since it will also come up and has been part of the previous discussions, has there been any thinking about traffic impact in consideration of that?
Just to again state that Public Works had no requirement for additional improvements either on the property or elsewhere. The city of Lexington also doesn't have what are called construction standards, where larger jurisdictions have those. If you have 100 PM peak hour trips generated from a property, as an example, then a traffic impact analysis may be or will be required. And so I did a little bit of research and found that 100 trips PM peak hour is a fairly standard threshold. So what happens when we have 62 units on the property, and how many PM peak hour? And sorry, dwelling units are typically thought to generate about 8 trips per day. 1 trip out to your office, 1 trip back, maybe to the grocery store, lunch, something. So typically a dwelling unit is somewhere around 8, and that kind of can shift a little bit depending where you are. And the other part of that calculation is for if the 100 PM peak hour, sorry, I didn't explain PM peak. For traffic analysis, they're always really interested in what happens in the AM peak and the PM peak, and the PM peak is normally higher than the AM. So they always try to figure out what's the worst case scenario. That's the PM peak around 4:30 to 6:30 or wherever it happens to be in your community. Mind you, our peak isn't very high, but that is the highest transportation or traffic generation time. So in the PM peak hour, what would this development generate 100 trips or not? And that's not even our standard because we don't have a standard, but I'm just using a threshold from Harrisonburg as an example that I found and other places. And if you go to the International Traffic Engineers Manual and you look up their little spreadsheet, what does a low-rise multifamily unit, what's the calculation? It's 0.52 or 0.53. I have it here somewhere. So if you multiply that by the 62 units, you get 34-ish PM peak hour trips, which is roughly a third of the 100 threshold. Long explanation, but the short part is this would not meet most localities' requirements for a traffic impact analysis.
Thank you. I'm bringing that up because I know it'll come up later.
So is the kind of thing we can do as a planning commission is to make a recommendation that are require that, for example, that they have a stoplight put at that intersection where they're coming in. Is that the kind of thing we can do? Or is that a public works thing? Or I mean, what can we do if we like the plan, but we are very concerned about traffic issues and from a public because that's public welfare in so many ways.
I would suggest that there's not enough information for planning commission at this time to make a recommendation for something as specific as a stoplight at pick one of the 2 intersections or a turn lane in or out of the property, simply because you don't have a traffic impact analysis. And the reason you don't have a traffic impact analysis is even if we had a requirement for one to be done at 100 PM peak hour trips, we are so far below that we wouldn't have required one. So you don't have the information to make a recommendation for a specific traffic improvement.
But then we're in a position where we don't have the information, but the next step is ministerial. And so we don't have the opportunity to really say anything in the future. So I mean, we're kind of in a difficult situation. Yeah. So I mean,
Again, I would suggest that this doesn't reach the level where a turn lane or a traffic light
is going
to be a requirement.
I mean, in simple terms, the issue is Houston Street. That's what people will be discussing, which is already congested. And so if we wanted to suggest, or maybe Public Works looks in more detail at what are some options so that, say, in the morning, you only take a right turn on Spotswood. I don't know. I don't, but I guess the question is, how do we encourage a closer look at those impacts on the area streets?
Public Works will receive the packet when the site plan comes in, and if they decide to take a closer look at it, they certainly can and make recommendations at that time.
Make recommendations to us or make recommendations to the builder or?
With site plans, we're not going to bring it to you until it meets the city's requirements or standards. And so it would go through a vetting, not a vetting, it would go through a review period with staff. And then if during that period of time or review period, Public Works decides that a turn lane is required, and I'm just using an example of one particular traffic measure, then that is something that they could require of the applicant, and it would come to you as something with a turn lane. So it's not so much a negotiation here. We would do that before to make sure that something that comes to you actually meets all the standards of the city of Lexington.
But then again, we as a commission can't say anything but yes to that unless they are clearly violating something. And then, and it's include, in addition, going up to the city council, is that ministerial for them as well? So we can't say, there's no chance for us to say no.
It has to be a pretty clear and obvious violation for you to be able to say no. So it is ministerial when you look at a site plan and it comes to you and only to you. It doesn't go to council.
Okay, no, sorry, one more question
Yeah.
on the circulation side. Arnie, I looked at the bike plan. And so Spotswood is designated to have a bike lane and Houston is to have Sharrows. I think, if I read the colors right, but I may be off. And so, and Spotswood offers us an opportunity to really do some good circulation planning. The 5-foot sidewalk that is proposed for this development, you know, should that continue up the, so what I'm getting at is that, and I'm not sure when it should occur, because you're saying it's too early now, but planning and development and public works take a more holistic view of the street and the development and its impact on the street. And that can occur later on, is what you're saying.
Correct. And I'm not sure if you're really asking this, but maybe I should just add, we can only require the developer to make site improvements. So we're looking at the impacts of multifamily developments on this site. If there are off-site improvements that are needed to meet another plan, the bike ped plan, then that's on the city to accomplish. I'm talking off-site. Again, I'm not sure that was the question, but just to make that point.
Okay, we'll park it for now.
I just want to ask one more question about the width. So if we have the ability to approve this CUP regardless of the width requirement, in what case would the width requirement stop you from, or stop, like, is there, like, how would that be prohibited? You know what I'm saying?
If I'm not sure, but perhaps if we're creating new lots,
Yeah.
subdivision, and they didn't have the 600 or whatever feet, then we wouldn't be approving a subdivision if it didn't meet the minimum lot size and lot width requirement.
Okay.
Does that
So
answer your?
maybe, so it's just in this specific case, we don't have to be bound by the width requirement.
I believe, since it's a conditional use permit, you have specific criteria for the approval or denial of a conditional use permit. I would focus on those, and if it meets those requirements, then I would recommend that you recommend approval.
Okay.
Any more questions for Arnie? Do we want to go to the applicant statement now?
Mhm.
All right, let's have the applicant statement. And please state your name in the microphone and address to the clerk.
Sure. Edwin Gaskin with Echelon Resources out of Richmond. I think there's like a presentation. Good evening and happy holidays. There's a lot of people that are here to speak, and so I want to go as quickly as possible so they can have as much time as they need. We've had 4 community meetings, at least 4, and at least 4 city council meetings. So I think our team's been well introduced to the public. But my firm's name is Echelon Resources, and we do developments all around Virginia and North Carolina. I know a lot of people here are holding a flyer that was distributed I'm going to try to cover some of those points.
You're
No,
with me.
you're doing great.
Mhm.
Do I just tab down? I'll try to address some of those as I go, but I'm sure public comments will come up, and I'm happy to address any questions the planning commission might have either now or after.
I think you can scroll
I
down.
can just
Or you may be able to navigate there.
we'll make it happen. Again, we're a team that works on placemaking, on quality places, and we try really hard to do that. We've been doing this for about 20 years, and we like interesting spots. We're all over Virginia and North Carolina.
Pardon me, folks are having trouble here. Yeah, and maybe turn that part up a little bit.
Sorry about that. Is that better?
Mhm.
Okay. We are owner.
I think they're saying it's still tough to hear.
I just turned the volume up.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Is this a little better? Okay. We are an owner developer team, meaning we are really involved in all aspects of the project, from design to capitalization to construction to operations. We're where the buck stops, so to speak. And I think Arnie covered really everything on this page. I think it's important to note that we try very hard to take a very small and complicated site and submit that to you all without any waiver requests. So we believe we've complied with all of your requirements for this conditional use permit. And we're frankly pretty proud of that. The site is difficult. It's hard. It's small. It has terrain that we tried to take advantage of. I think a few of you noted that in terms of the terracing of the building. We have complied with all the applicable setback requirements, including those that allow us to get up to that 45-foot height, 45-foot height. And to answer a question that came up about the front door, there are a few secondary doors on the project to allow for safe egress and ingress. But really, the front door is defined by where is your accessible parking, where is your call box, where is your knock box, where are your mailboxes, where is your leasing office, and all of that is in that sort of midships level of the site. So it's more than just having a sign there. It's where operationally where people would intuitively go to visit a friend or deliver a pizza or et cetera, et cetera. So this is the site, and to the point about site plan, this hasn't been engineered for, say, stormwater management. We haven't gone to that level, but this is a pretty significant site plan. It's far more than a concept. We've had to make several adjustments from the initial one that we presented to City Council. So you're going to see basically this, only with a lot more calculations attached to it when we go to site plan. So we have taken it to an unusual level for this stage of planning. And we did that because, frankly, it's again, small site, complicated, every inch counts. And so things like a 5-foot sidewalk along Spotswood, that has a material difference here. And so incorporating that was important to calculate now, so you wouldn't see significant changes at a later date. You all covered in depth the project elevation. Sorry, the dimensions were a little small. Here you see on this page where that front door would be, again, taking advantage of the terracing of the site. We consider this 3 stories and a partial basement, with that basement fronting Spotswood. Again, these are just concepts, and frankly, we went with the we went with more of a modern look because frankly, we wanted to differentiate it from historic Lexington. This is a new site, new construction, an opportunity to have a new era of aesthetic appeal. We also wanted to play off the hospital, which is of course adjacent and important, I guess, reference point, both in terms of massing and style. Obviously a different era of construction, but we wanted to create sort of a transition cosmetic from that to the more traditional Lexington look. Going back to the site plan, one of the comments was about no green space or bike trails. That is not true. We have incorporated all the green space as required, and we actually have that 5-foot sidewalk for public access across the site and connectivity. And one of our properties involves bike storage. There's not a lot to play with here in terms of green space, but where we could, we did, and we complied with the applicable requirements. let's see, one of the difficult things to navigate with the site is the idea of existing utilities, city utilities that do run across the site. So we've had a lot of dialogue with Public Works, Public Utilities, and Planning to make sure we can thread the needle. Our parking lot is where it is, basically because that's over the utilities, and the building is where it is because it's not over the utilities. So that was a defining way where the tail wagged the dog, so to speak, in terms of the public utilities. There was a comment about water sewer capacity. Again, this has been routed already, and it's really the city's job to determine whether or not there's adequate water sewer capacity. We have gotten no indication that there would be a problem here, so I'm not sure where that concern came from.
That concern came from just the fact that there's a big pond that seems to develop all the time. There's a lot of water collection focused right down there. So I was just wondering, from a city standpoint, are we ready to handle that? And
Sure.
you say that you're saying it's not your problem, it's that's there, they should have dealt with that. And that's fine.
I
but
think we're
is
talking
that-
about two different things. The public water and sewer capacity, that's what I'm saying. That's for the city to analyze. The pond that you're referring to in front of the site on the site plan here, that's actually a stormwater pond. And that's actually to capture the runoff from the parking lots and other impervious surface elements that we're creating and basically retain that so it doesn't overwhelm the stormwater system. So I'm sorry if I misunderstood your
No,
question. Let's see, project elevations. Again, different perspectives. This is all metal cementitious product, very durable. This is going to be a highly amenitized project for its size. We're going to have a very nice top floor, really, frankly, really pretty awesome club room, tall ceiling, big open areas, indoor, outdoor areas. There's walking paths, there's bike storage. There's only so much you could do with 62 units, but we believe we have a nice amenity package scaled to that level. There was a comment or a concern raised about affordable housing was deleted from the sales agreement. That's never been the case. This has always been represented as a market rate project. From the very beginning, I have a copy of the sales agreement here. I know what it says. This is not an affordable or LIHTC or low-income housing tax credit project. Nothing against those, that this is specifically not that type of project. We talked about the modern building elements playing off the hospital. We actually believe that we are in conformance with the comp plan. And we have listed in our zoning application the reference points that allow for that. So this is taking from some of our city council presentations. We've always liked the site. We've always liked Lexington. We like the walkability and connectivity. To the point about traffic, I agree with Arnie that 62 units really does not have a measurable impact on existing public roads. But beyond that, given work from home trends and the fact that Lexington is so well connected in terms of pedestrian and bike connectivity, that's the point of the site. That's what attracted us to it. That's not to say people won't have vehicles, they certainly will. And we have just more parking spaces than what would be required for zoning. But I think the odds are in the favor of the project being more pedestrian friendly than a traditional out in the boonies, suburban garden walk-up style development. So that is what attracted us to the site. That's why we believe it will be successful. Not frankly for anything that we could build there, but the fact that it's plugged into Lexington at that point. The town, the city is the amenity, and we've always felt that. We have made several adjustments in the last 2 years as we've gone through this journey. Again, it's 62 units starting from 150. We have lowered the building height. We've moved the massing away from Houston Street out of respect for the neighbors, and we've actually increased the buffer to exceed the zoning requirements there. It's not going to be perfect. Not everybody's going to be happy. I'm sure there are plenty of people that aren't, but we have tried to adjust within our power to push the massing elements further away from the single family homes. What's the rationale for this? Again, affordable, attractive housing is key. And the Danter study actually, despite what the brochure, the flyer says, does say that there's a major shortage of all categories of housing. We do traditionally do professional grade housing. We're focused on that. Our units are 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom, 41 ones and 21 twos. We obviously fair housing laws, we're open to any type of applicant that's qualified. But really what tends to lease in the products that we build are young professionals, middle-aged professionals, just starting out in their careers, looking for a transitional phase in their life and a great place to live. Again, here we talk about conforming with the 2040 comprehensive plan, the comprehensive plan, and City Council has expressed numerous times a desire for professionally managed upscale rental housing at this site. Again, pretty proud of that. No waivers, variances, or exceptions requested. Arnie's gone over the conditions offered. These are some very technical, but all very important, and were worked on collaboratively with city staff. Happy to take any questions either now or later.
Have you made this, your PDF presentation, available to staff so they can post it on the website? This is, okay.
We can post it. And that gives me the opportunity to also say that we typically don't post the applications when they come in for conditional use permits, but we did for this particular one, knowing full well what the interest it might generate. So the application has already been on for a while, and we can certainly add this PowerPoint to that, this PDF to that section of the Planning and Development Department's page of the city's website.
Thanks.
What, you mentioned there was a basement. What's the basement usage? Is it?
I'm sorry, when I say basement, it's more having to do with the terracing of the site.
Okay.
On the Spotswood side, as you see there, that lower level, there are units there.
It's there. Okay.
Correct, but we call it a basement because it's only part of the site, really that section. It's kind of an L-shaped building going up here. Just this front section along Spotswood is really where the units are. Nice views, nice daylights. And that's where that secondary door was that was causing some confusion at the beginning.
Can I ask, are you really considering putting a swimming pool at the front? It says conceptual swim facility.
No, ma'am. That is a stormwater management
Oh, I
pond.
thought it said swim
I
facility.
hope, I very much hope not.
No, when I squinted the first time.
Little pond, maybe for the occasional
No,
duck.
Thank you. That was my making.
Actually, you gave me a hard time.
Stormwater.
I was like, this is not the kind of project that could fit a swimming pool.
Is there, Mr. Haskins, is there going to be parking available on the frontage of of that property, street parking?
Oh, not within our control, or not that we're counting on.
Okay.
It'll stay as is until Public Works makes a change to it, but there's no plan that I'm aware of to change the
That's that
existing
question.
parking requirements along Spotswood Street.
Okay.
We're fully self-parked within the lot, and that
Yeah,
was no
I get that.
small feat.
I'm just thinking about the one time a year when there's, elections and public parking is allowed on that section.
Mhm.
And I don't recall if that's going to change with the elections or not, but if elections stay there, then we would most likely keep it as is.
On the placement of the entrance drive, did you come up with that with the city? I'm just wondering, I don't have an issue with them, just trying to understand why it's there.
It's there because that's where the engineer said is the only place it can go.
Okay.
We originally, if you recall from the city council presentation, had actually wanted it right across from the stub to the
Mhm.
cemetery there. When we initially kind of drew this out, that's where we thought it'd be
Right.
cool to put it. But because of the terrain and the fall off and the necessary turn radii for fire trucks
Mhm.
and such, we had to post it in that section.
Okay, I figured there was a reason why it was there. And as far as leveling the property, especially around the parking lot, what are your plans for grading it, or is it staying fairly as it is? somewhat
It's
as it
fairly
is?
as it is. In fact, the engineers, I thought, did a very good job. We don't, I don't want to say that we have kind of a zero sum site,
Mhm.
but we're very close. We wanted to use the terrain as, frankly, an advantage. But we like how it slopes from the high to the low to the cemetery. We also think it sort of adds itself to the transitional effect of this parcel from the hospital, both the cemetery and the single family homes along Houston. That's one of the regions that we massed everything back there next to Rara and towards the hospital. So there is going to be some regrading, obviously, to be done, and possible relocation of some of the underground utilities in the parking lot. But it won't be a mammoth earthworks kind of project.
And is there an elevator in the facility? There was one spot that looked like.
There is right
okay.
around where that sort of in the crux of the L, the
Yeah.
elbow of the L, that little diagonal thing right behind there on the corridor. There's an elevator.
Great. And what about, do you have any apartments that are specifically handicap accessible or?
We will do per building code, which if I recall, that's 1 per 50. So we'll have at least 2
Okay.
accessible apartments. If there's any ADA savants out there, if I'm wrong, I apologize. That's for the architect to noodle through, but I believe it's 1 per 50
Okay,
units.
which is, I personally find it's great that you have an elevator and there'll be a couple of handicap accessible or accessible units because that is a huge need in our community. And even with some of the existing market rate apartments we have, in fact, a lot of them, they don't have an elevator or they even have step ups even to get on the ground level
Right.
apartments. So
And,
I'm glad to hear
and to
that.
your point, I mean, an accessible unit has a very, very technical requirements that we will meet. But
Mhm.
frankly, if somebody does have mobility issues or such, many of the units will be useful for them because we won't have really steps or accessible areas without elevator access and such. So those units won't meet their technical accessible requirements,
Uh-huh.
but it'll still be available for people that it might suit their needs.
Right. And we talked a little bit about the roof equipment. What equipment do you see up there and do you have plans for screening that equipment?
Sure. So every unit will basically have its own system. So there'll be at least 62 units up there and plus corridor and amenity areas. So 65 to 70 units. They'll be masked sort of along the center spine of that L. We'll pull them back from the roof line. So from spots where you should not be able to see them. As Arnie said, these rest on, 4-inch blocks and they're about 40 inches tall total. So these are kind of with the new SEER requirements, they're a little taller than kind of your average residential unit, outdoor unit, but they're not dissimilar to that. They're essentially the same type of product.
Okay.
So
And will any part of the roof be used as a patio?
they were not, we debated that, but that would have blown our height requirement because you would have had a dog house or bring the elevator up. That would have kind of blown that. So we purposefully sacrificed unit space inside of the envelope to create a club room with some indoor outdoor patio space.
Yeah.
Actually, it's on the corner that is sort of on this side on the 3rd floor that sort of overlooks the little non-swimming pool pond.
Yeah, right.
So overlooks the cemetery.
Right.
It's a really neat space that's been designed, but that is fully inside the building, no roof access.
Okay, because it would have been nice, yeah, to be able
It
to.
would have
use the
been, but
roof
then we
somewhat,
would have
but
run
yes.
afoul of the height requirement, so we had to call that.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have a sense of that you'd be able to share what the current market rate is for units of this type?
Yeah, I do actually. So obviously this will change from this
Sure.
point to when we open, but right now we're in the 12 to 1,300 a month for a 1-bedroom and a 15 to 1,700 a month for a 2-bedroom. That's if we were opening today. Obviously from the time it gets built now to it's built, we all read the news on inflation.
Sure.
Everything's going up in cost, as will this, but that's what we're making the pro forma work with today.
Okay.
One of your concept images shows like a terrace, the grading with a terrace, like closest to where I guess the adjacent to the hospital or Rara is that intended, or is that are you gonna have a slope there, or is that
Definitely sloped.
Okay.
That's just sort of
okay?
crude software, I
Gotcha.
guess. It'll be sloped. You kind of see on this one, it's a little smoother on this bottom one here.
Yeah, it's just a different angle. So
But it's still not
Okay.
as smooth as it'll be. This is the architect that did this, not an engineer. So when they came to the site work side, they disclaimed that away. So
Can you explain something to me? I'm sorry, I'm gonna pick up on this again, the non-swimming pool. Where does it, My big concern is you have, this is all green right now, and so if it rains, the rain can go into the green and sink down. This pond though becomes the resource. Everything is going to be diverted off into this pond. Where does the pond, I mean, it sinks down slowly, but does it sink into the sewer or does it just sink into the ground? How does that work? I just don't know.
And I can't answer that. I'm the furthest thing from a civil engineer, but the intent from a developer's perspective is to retain the water until it can be slowly absorbed into either the ground or the stormwater system. That's the high level understanding. Maybe Arnie can correct me.
Also not an engineer or an architect, but all stormwater systems are through calculations. So it depends on what your impervious was before. As you pointed out, there is no impervious currently on the property. So the change that you make, and then the calculations come into play as far as how much water you have to retain, how long you have to retain it, how much impervious you've added to the property. And you can think of that if it's I can always get retention and detention facility confused. One retains it for a period of time, so it's dry in most times of the year. And then when there's that runoff, it runs into it, fills it up, and then there's a spout like a tub and it drains out slowly over time. So it's intended to hold it for a period of time, depending on how much rain gets into there, and it then goes into the stormwater system that then eventually makes its way out through the entire system. So all of that will go to the state for review, but through DEQ. So once it's engineered to meet all of those requirements, they will then give us an approval, and then we'll issue the building permits. That's the part of the building permit process. And for them to obtain a building permit, their stormwater has to meet state requirements.
So will state requirements make sure that this doesn't just become a stagnant pond that just has water sitting there until the next rain comes and then mosquitoes start going crazy? Or how does that work?
It depends on how it's designed. It could be, and I hope I'm getting this right, it could be a detention pond that detains the water and then you'll see water in it at all times. And then the requirements for those, depending on how deep they are and how sloped they are, they may have to have a fence, may not have to have a fence. They may have to have that little aerator thing in them. And I'm not sure about the mosquito control specifically, but just because it's shown as a stormwater facility doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be designed as a detention facility. It could be a retention facility. More similar to the one that you saw recently for Kendall, where they have a couple of different ponds and it's making its way through, it's sinking into the ground and then it's making its way through. And those are always dry. Oh, not always dry. Those are retention. So they're meant to be dry most of the time, except for when they fill up during a rain event. And then again, they are engineered in such a way they leak out a certain amount over time until they're empty again.
From an owner developer perspective, we don't want a duck pond full of mosquitoes either.
Yeah.
It's intended to be a subtle part of the landscaping that serves its purpose during a storm or some kind of significant rain to not overwhelm the adjacent city stormwater system. So it's, from my perspective, however, non-technical, it's intended to be a temporary retention.
And is there a requirement that there's safety? I mean, you don't want a kid coming along and going swimming in the retention pond and then having a problem there, right? Is there going to be, we don't have any guidelines with how you have to.
We don't, but I believe the state
Yeah, the
does.
state,
And
it depends on slope and depth. Again, all subject to engineering. So if it's past a certain depth and the sides are a certain slope, it will require fencing.
We do have those at our schools and at the community center and in Richardson Park and in the park next to Waddell as well. We have them throughout the city. They don't stay filled with water for very long.
I'd also add that VMI has used some relatively new technology of putting filters in where the storm drains goes into from the parking lot. So
With the trees, the Filterra systems, they're pretty cool.
I think that's it. And I saw a presentation on it and they spoke favorably of it, even the long-term maintenance issue, because that's usually the one that gets you in the end. So I know we can't ask you to do anything, but we could ask you to look at those.
Honestly, with such a small site, we're motivated to really use all the creative cards that are available to us because it's hard to make the math work on such a small site where you're taking previously green grass and introducing so much impervious surface.
So that may be a more decentralized approach rather than creating a large retention pond. And you may need both, or it would reduce the amount to the retention pond.
So just a clarification. So there's 41 proposed 1 bedrooms and 21 proposed 2 bedrooms. Is that correct?
21 1 beds, 21 2 beds, 41 1 beds. Yes, sir.
Okay, so it could potentially house up to like 83 people around there. If you,
I mean, really, HUD requirements, fair housing laws per HUD, I think it's 2 per bedroom
2 per
plus
bedroom,
1.
sure.
But honestly, in an operational leasing environment, we've never seen maximum occupancy happen per those metrics.
Sure, okay.
Typically in a 1 bedroom unit, nicely appointed, you're going to have a single person or a couple. We often see the 2 bedrooms being used as a bedroom and an office, particularly
office.
from work from home crowd. But occasionally you'll see like a small child, a small family, a young family. But again, we're not amenitized to really attract, somebody with older kids per se, or a larger family. No playgrounds or swimming pool or anything like that. So again, our tenant mix tends to be younger, more professional, starting out early on in their careers.
Just two, because we've covered one. I had 3 questions. We've covered stormwater. Under condition number 7, can you explain what a reasonable effort is to make the connection to the adjoining medical office property?
So we love the idea of
And
connectivity.
maybe the 2-part, Mr. Gaskins. The second part is, will it accommodate pedestrians from Spotswood Drive?
That's
And it's a
two-
challenging site. So
It is a challenging site. To answer your first question, which is a little bit easier, if the adjacent property owner is willing to grant us an easement, we would love the connection. We didn't want to, we couldn't offer something that we couldn't deliver here. So we will, if approved, we will approach them. And if they find that appealing, then we will definitely put in a connection. Now, in terms of making the parcel, going back to the site plan, a trail through the site, frankly, for all sorts of reasons, generally insurance related, we're reluctant to create a public trail across the site. When people pull into this and they're living there, they expect it to be their home. They expect it to be, somewhat private, if you will. Obviously, there's public access through the parking lot, but that's intended for visitors, deliveries. And we try to create that environment of respect. Given the public street right next to Rah-Rah, so close by, we think there's ample circulation opportunity around there without cutting through our site.
thank you. And then the last question I have is around the landscaping condition, which I appreciate the offer to work with the city arborist to improve the tree canopy. And I know that the final site plan will be more specific about where the trees will be placed. We have a real opportunity here. You can begin a good thing along Spotswood by planting shade trees along the sidewalk. And basically, I would say, think like, what would you want the trees to look like in 10 years? Right. And so does that mean that the parking lot would benefit from trees, that there would be places where you can park your car under the shade, if you're lucky with the right angle of the sun, on the perimeter of the parking lot on Houston Street side. So I would encourage you, and you're working with the arborist, to think in those longer term. Think longer term.
This is the exception, this new construction piece. We are environmentalists by nature. We do a lot of historic redevelopment around multiple states. We believe in that, and landscaping is a key part of not only the financial investment in the site long-term, but also just the quality of life feel. It's more of a squishy narrative side, but it's important because as you're exiting the building, entering the parking lot, walking through, biking away, there's a certain feel to a site. And we believe that landscaping is a key element of softening those hard edges. And frankly, having the city having those resources that we can work collaboratively with is a huge asset, in my opinion. It'll be a much better project because of that collaboration. That person knows those native species that thrive here better than we ever will. So let's share that knowledge and put it to good use here.
Thank you.
Great. Any more questions or let's thank you, Mr. Haskins. We are now going to open up public comment. People one at a time are welcome to make public comment. I'd ask that you be respectful of everyone's time. We're limiting each person to 3 minutes. Please do not go over that. I'll try to get your attention if I see that it's going longer than 3 minutes. And also restating things that have already been said. We would hope to avoid that. But other than that, feel free to come up and speak, say your name and your address so it's on the public record. Oh, we have a sign-up sheet. Okay, sorry, thank you. We have Margaret Robertson. Okay,
Yes, 245 Denny Lane.
great, thank you.
The application by Echelon for a conditional use permit is deficient as it materially modifies previously approved conditions contained within Exhibit A Spotswood Drive parcel project expectations. As part of the sales agreement for the parcel under consideration, the two areas that have been modified are stormwater management. Contained within the project expectations document, Echelon consented to provide rain gardens and/or bioretention structures on site within the required green space. Consider the use of pervious pavement to minimize stormwater leaving the site. All stormwater management plans require approval of both the city and DEQ. In the CUP application, Echelon has modified this requirement by stating applicant will provide on-site stormwater management, rain gardens, or bioretention facilities where feasible. Echelon has eliminated the requirement that all stormwater management plans require the approval of the city and DEQ. Site buffers. Contained within the project expectations document, Echelon consented to existing trees in these buffer areas must be maintained. In Echelon's CUP application, they have modified this requirement by stating existing trees in these buffer areas will be maintained where feasible. These commitments have been materially modified, excuse me, in Echelon's CUP application from the agreed upon terms in the project expectations document. In addition, condition 1A from page 5 of the staff report has not been met as Echelon has failed to provide a traffic study showing additional traffic will not cause impedance to emergency vehicles accessing the hospital or in the impact of an additional 85 vehicles to the surrounding neighborhood. Condition 1C from page 5 of the staff report has not been met in that project design is a modern building that does not conform to surrounding neighborhood architecture, nor does it follow the comprehensive plan for historic architecture. Condition 1D from the page 5 of the staff report has not been met as Echelon and the city of Lexington had failed to prove that the project will not adversely impact an already ancient water and sewer infrastructure. Echelon has misrepresented facts in their application for the project. The study performed by Danter and Associates does not show a severe shortage of professional grade housing in Lexington. Professional grade housing is not mentioned in the study. It does show a severe shortage for housing for Washington and Lee students and persons over 55. The project does not foster or include any affordable housing units as that portion of the sales agreement was deleted after the fact. The project does not conform to Lexington comprehensive plans as claimed. As noted on the application, City Council has expressed a desire for professionally managed upscale rental community at this site. This project is not about the needs of the community, but the desires of the City Council to provide a solution to Washington and Lee student housing problems at the expense of Lexington taxpayers. Accordingly, Echelon's CUP application is deficient and should be denied. Mr. Gaskins said that his application did not say anything about affordable housing, but on page 2, under planning objectives for mixed use neighborhoods, it has a bullet point that says foster the development of a variety of housing types, including affordable housing. It doesn't do that. So Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Next on the list is Heidi Kellner.
Such a large plan for such a small town and such a small site. I heard a lot of conflicting information coming out tonight. I spent a little bit of time previewing the 200-page Lexington Comprehensive Plan of 2040. There are about 9 points in that plan, and 6 of them are relevant to this project. And of those 6, this project doesn't, it goes against the comprehensive plan. Let's see, no historic character. To say that you want a modern building because there's a modern hospital, nobody wants to live in a hospital. We live on Houston Street. We look over the site. We just brought my tech job, my husband's retirement, and we'll be bringing inheritance into the community. We are throwing thousands and thousands of dollars into restoring our historical architecture of our 1888 house, which is a stone's throw from this monstrosity of a building plan. Another point in the comprehensive plan is green infrastructure. There's nothing green about this plan. It's half parking lot and pond. There's 70 units I find out on the roof tonight. What kind of noise level are we talking about? Are these eco-friendly units? What kind of light pollution are we looking at in our neighborhood? Lots of conflicting ideas in this plan. The local economy, marketing Lexington as a historic community. It's why we moved here. There's nothing historic about this. Again, character to attract businesses, nothing. Arts and culture is an important part of the community. I have a master's in fine arts. There's nothing artistic about this plan whatsoever. I would love to see some of the architecture from Main Street brought over into the building. There's lots of beautiful elements that could be brought into this plan. Nothing. The housing aspect of the comprehensive plan is being completely ignored in this project. Foster the improvement of cities' neighborhoods. This is going to ruin my neighborhood as far as I'm concerned. It's going to lower my property value immediately. We left Urbana, Illinois because of apartment complexes that look just like this. Land use is this part of the comprehensive plan. Innovative development that respects and complements and builds on Lexington's historic character. Again, I give this plan a 0. Some of the conflicting things we've heard tonight is that this is a small site. Well, this is a large project to put on a small site. When we first moved here, my husband said, there'll be nothing ever there. Look, that's a drainage situation. And I thought, absolutely, that's drainage. Who could possibly build on that? Well, a 4-story unit that's half parking lot, that's quite a building. I'm almost done. I see I'm at 3 minutes. The modern building that they are proposing, not Lexington. And again, he talks about walkways and green space incorporated in the plan, and yet then he says there are no walkways. We don't have the room. Again, over and over, it's too small of a space for such a large project. I think they need to go back to the drawing board and come up with a more historic plan with a smaller unit that takes all of these unanswered questions into account. There were so many unanswered questions about traffic. And we have other people that live in the neighborhood that I'm sure will talk about traffic. Water, sewage, light pollution, green space. Please don't let this project go through. This is not our community. This is not why I moved here. This is not what people are looking for here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heidi. That's Heidi at 105 Houston Street. All right, next on the list is Robert Zordani. Also 105 Houston Street.
Heidi said a lot of great things, and I think that everything she said was correct. When I'm looking at this building plan, I'm looking at this building. It is just drop dead ugly. It is not historic. It does not fit our neighborhood. It does not fit Lexington. They're talking about 12 to what, $1,800 a month rent at these places for young professionals or middle-aged professionals. Is this a spot right there under the hospital with the helicopter pad, that you're gonna attract people to historic Lexington, young professionals to live. I think I'll go there at that apartment complex down there under the hospital and bring my job there to live in this great historic town. It's foolishness. This is a bad plan. If you guys approve this plan, you're being bamboozled, and our community is being bamboozled. And I hope you take that all into account. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Next is Gary Butler. Please say your name and address.
Name is Gary Butler. I live at 106 Houston Street, adjacent to the property. I've lived there for 20 years now. To begin off with, my sewer from my house, the city sewer goes in the middle of that field where they're going to build. And also, as you know, the other people have spoken, they have spoken about the neighborhood. Well, the neighborhood is more than just the people who live there. It's also the hospital. And the hospital will be expanded in time. And with that expansion, there's going to be more crowded. And also the people that goes to the hospital, the doctor's office is there. I mean, there is traffic there. I can speak to the traffic because I live there. Whenever I move my yard, I got to look twice before I step off the side of the curb to keep from getting ran over. That's how bad it is. It needs to be looked at, because once things like this goes, it's not coming back. You make this change, and will Lexington be the same? No. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Next, we have Ben Grigsby.
Good evening. I'm Ben Grigsby, 111 Lee Avenue. Surprisingly, I'm going to be very brief. I'm opposed to this project. I think the scaling is absolutely inappropriate for the neighborhood. It contravenes all the architectural integrity of the neighborhood. I think the noise requirement, the noise impact on neighboring houses will be substantial. I mean, the last thing I want to do is have a bunch of W&L students coming in at 2 a.m, parking their cars the car length away from my backyard. So I just think the whole scale of this is inappropriate. I'm not opposed to development, but it needs to be scaled properly. As you will remember, I was a member of a collaborative effort to go look at development of the property, adding to the tax rolls. That was a suitable scale with plenty of green space. I'm sure that the talent of Echelon can come up with a plan that does not look like a motel that belongs at an interstate junction for this site. So I really do think that the planning commission is the first point of call to go kind of address not what's technically allowed by the regs and the ordinances, but try to find something that is consistent with a comprehensive plan that is consistent with the architectural heritage of Lexington. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Next is Brenda Griever. Oh, take your time. You're fine.
Hello. We'll probably jump around because I didn't write down anything.
Just say your name and the address, please.
My name is Brenda Beard Griever. I live at 313 Miller Street. My family has lived on Houston Street for 4 generations and Miller Street. My grandmother, I lived with from the time I was 11 till I got married. And I do have heard the story about when that part of the land and the other part was given to the cemetery for the cemetery. The city has never cared about this side of Main Street. It's always that side of Main Street. I am angry. I am upset. The cemetery was supposed to be there. And when they first did it, I know a lot of y'all know my name because I've written in the newspaper many times. I asked, how come it couldn't be a cemetery anymore? And the response I got was because there's all these pipes under there that have come from the medical building that we just put up, and no one can be buried there. Well, if it's not deep enough, if it's that bad for dead people, What's it going to be for people that's alive? There is going to be stinking cesspool water. It does not set the neighborhood right. I am very proud of Houston Street. People go up Houston Street more than y'all think to avoid the stoplights to get to Walker Street and go down and hit the other side of town. I have seen it. I have seen it a lot. And as far as the city council, you're going to get mad. But everything that was said tonight was trying to fit yourself in. This has been planned for decades. Like I said, I've been here for decades, as has 4 generations of my family, maybe 5. 4, I know where they lived. And this has been planned. Okay, let's get Spotswood Drive through there so we can have the rescue squad building. Okay, we can do that. And after that was done, this can't be a cemetery anymore. This has nothing. It's divided by a road. Heaven forbid. And then the rescue squad moved out. But yet that humongous rescue squad building, including all the places for the rescue squad building, is still there. I realize Rah-Rah is a fantastic place, and I'm not fighting about Rah-Rah. But to take the cemetery from the local residents, because all y'all are transplants and do not care where we get buried, unless you go to a country church and they have a cemetery there, you're just poop out of luck unless you want to be cremated, which I do not. I ain't going to the fire. And right now I'm so mad I can't even think of what else I was going to say. But it's like, okay, well, we don't know if it is in zone, if it's in code. And in the back of your mind, it's like, no, but we can rewrite it so it can be. If they don't like what we're doing, we can fix it so they can do it anyway. There is no consideration for the local people in Lexington. None. Let's get some big, tall building so all these other people can move there that don't want to be here. I take the city of Lexington to my heart. I lived with my grandmother 13 years. She knew the people that gave the land to the Lexington Cemetery, and it might have been Lexington Presbyterian at that point. I'm not sure about that because I haven't looked it up. She talked to them. She knows what they wanted, and that was fine. But then when they had to put Spotswood through, they took Miss Eva Gillespie's house from Houston Street and moved it down to the corner of Taylor and Spotswood. Anything to get this fixed so we can get more tax income. If you want more tax income, I know you can't tax VMI, but you can W. Neal. And as far as the places for people to live that are going to W. Neal, get rid of Lexington Building Supply. Do something on that side and leave us alone. Thank you.
Thanks, Brenda. Next, we have Connie Crittenden.
Good evening. Connie Crittenden, 22 Whitmore Street. So when I was reading just some general information, I came across the statement that the Planning Commission is responsible for preparing and maintaining the comprehensive plan. We've heard a lot about that tonight. And I know that all of you know the comprehensive plan well because you developed it. But within that was a vision, and this is a little bit of a shortening of it, but the content is appropriate. The city of Lexington will develop by diversifying economic opportunities, housing options, while protecting the city's rich historic resources and enhancing the quality of life enjoyed by its residents. And I think you've heard tonight that this is not going to enhance any quality of life for anyone in the proximity of this space. Not to mention, as far as the historic point goes, I agree with the other speakers. This is an incredibly ugly sight to behold. Even uglier if that pond has to be fenced. Driving down Spotswood, we're going to look at the back of this glorious structure. We don't want to. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Next on the sign-up sheet is Glady Hopkins.
Gladys Hopkins, 317 South Main Street. I just agree with everything that the people before me have said. And I think the one thing I really picked up on this evening when Arnie was talking was public welfare and safety. This certainly is not going to this is not going to protect the safety of the area around Spotswood, in particular, Houston Street. It's a well-traveled street right now. I know, I use it all the time. It's almost impossible for two-way traffic on that street as it is now. Now you add all this additional traffic from a project of this size, and it certainly is not taking into consideration any public welfare. Thank you.
Thank you, Gladys. That's everybody that's signed up. If we still have public comment open, so if you want to speak now, please come up, state your name and address. Thank you.
My name is Maria Schweitzer. I live at One Hill Circle, which is a little street off of Main Street. I travel Houston Street all the time. I also travel Preston. My concern is that that Spotswood project has three ways out: Houston, Preston, and then down to Nelson Street. Every one of those has bob and weave traffic situations when there's oncoming traffic because the roads are too narrow as it is. Once there is parking there's parking allowed on Preston, there's parking allowed on Houston. And when I drive down those two roads, invariably you're stopping behind a parked car so that oncoming traffic can pass, and then you bob around the parked car and keep on going. I don't think we can support another 84 cars making 8 trips a day on those roads. Preston leads directly to downtown and directly to W&L. It will be used a lot. Houston Street is another way to get to Main Street and then to W&L. You're talking about putting W&L students in this apartment. Those two streets will be used a lot because when you go out Spotswood to Nelson Street, it's really difficult to make a left-hand turn without a traffic light. And if you put a traffic light there, then you have a traffic light, 4 traffic lights in a row, 1 block apart. You start at Sheets, then you have CVS, then you have Washington Street where it comes out, and then you'd have a traffic light at Spotswood. 4 traffic lights in a row. 3 is already bad enough. So I just think a traffic study has to be done. And I cannot believe that this board or city council cannot require a traffic study of Echelon before you approve this. I don't care what the threshold says for traffic in the PM. Even if we're well below that, we don't have adequate roads coming in and out of this development. And Echelon should be required to do a traffic study before you move forward with approving this. Thank you.
Thank you. Come on up.
My name's Kelly Peters. I live at 410 Arpia. I'm a contractor. And I think that brings some bearing on this a little bit. It looks like to me that city council wants this project. Mr. Gaskin's company wants it. And maybe you guys do too, but we don't. We really don't. And if it does go through, I wouldn't want a traffic study that they pay for, because all the studies that people that want something done that they pay for the study, it tells them what they wanted to. I think the city should have a traffic study done. I agree with the other lady that said that there's already bobbing and weaving on all these roads, and there are. And as far as public welfare goes, this is going to impact schools, roads, healthcare, everything. And from what I understand, they're not being made to pay a proffer as a contractor. If I build a house in Lexington, I have to pay 5,000 or 4,200 or something, and then Arnie, for water hookup and for sewer. So you're talking 8,500 to hook up if I want to build a house, if I can actually find a lot in Lexington to hook up to. So they should pay for that. They should pay for all of these things. If you're going to get them, they should make a turn lane and have you should have a turn lane in the middle of the road and a turn lane to get into it. And if they can't do that, it shouldn't be there. And yes, it is ugly. And that's pretty much what I have to say. I'm against it, but if it has to be done, then you guys need to make them do it the right way and have a turn lane. And you need to take into consideration also all the green stuff that they're talking about. And it's probably an ugly building because it's the cheapest way to build it.
Thank you, Kelly. Anybody else?
Robin Youngblood, 104 Houston Street. First, I can answer one of your questions, why people are concerned about the sewer lines capabilities. I can tell you because I had to replace mine 2 years ago. It's one of the ones that now runs out under their proposed parking lot. The sewer line we replaced was made of tarred paper. And of course, it got a tree root through it. If that's the kind of infrastructure for a house built in the 60s, what is it for a house built previous century? Okay, I've spoken with my homeowner's insurance yesterday and discussing about the drainage field being taken away. Their comment was, as long as at least one of the stormwater things is done, I should be fine. I don't know what the state's requirements are on that. But if they don't do any of them, then I'll need flood insurance. When the food pantry is open, especially Monday afternoons, the traffic through there on that section, you have cars backed up along the road. Usually the cars don't stop at a stop sign. It's really dangerous to be pedestrian during that time. So any traffic study should be done when the food pantry is open. What kind of sound insulation are they providing for the occupants of the apartments? Are they being told they're going to have helicopters flying over them day and night? I agree with a lot of the objections, but also my husband and I spent 2 years looking for someplace we could afford to live around here. So I can understand the need for that kind of housing. My one other suggestion is for us whose backyards back up onto it, you might consider gaining some goodwill if you gave us driveways that we could access. That way we wouldn't have to park on the street anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak? Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to close public comment. And we can move into commission discussion and decision.
It might be helpful for everyone who came tonight and spoke, and for us as a commission to clarify what is it that we as a commission can really focus on and talk about. We can't say anything about an ugly design. It's not within our parameters or competency to do that. That's something that it's good that people come here and speak, because in a way for the city council members who are here, they get to hear this for the first time and maybe for a second time when it comes to them. So I just think for us as a commission, before we start the discussion, we should be clear about what is it that we can comment on. Where's the focus of our discussion? And it usually is around rather boring technical issues, such as the dimensions, the four criteria that for continuing issuing a conditional use permit, some of that which is subjective, like our discussion on health and welfare. And then maybe some of the technical issues around the utilities and infrastructure. We can't really question the business plan of Mr. Gaskin. That's his choice. Is there anything that am I clarifying pretty well what our parameters are? Okay.
The only the parameter that people have commented on is that, as is in C, the comprehensive plan. that
And the
we
comprehensive
have
plan.
to-
Yeah,
That
I'm-
is something that we need to.
I meant to, I'm sorry, Matt, thank you for, that's fine, yeah. That was the other point, is that we do have some latitude around commenting from the comprehensive plan point of view.
Leslie, I don't know, would you be able to summarize city council's decision and perspective to go with this model of development for that site? Why it was decided to go for, this type of project?
We, as a city, we need more housing. We need all types of housing. And actually that is in our vision statement of our comprehensive plan, as was read earlier, that we need a diversity of housing as well as of our economic base as well. What this project does for us is twofold. It expands our tax base, which is something we need, so that as we keep doing more projects and they cost more money, that we don't ask each of you to keep paying more. We bring more people into the city and they can afford it. And we need housing. I've been trying to help my boss for a year and a half find some temporary housing, and it is hard to find. We only found it because we had connections with friends who are willing to let him use spaces. I hear it from realtors all the time. We hear it from employers as well, that we need more housing, particularly of this type of transitional housing. I know some people brought up, isn't the hospital concerned having this building right next to them? They're excited about it. Greg Madsen, the president of the hospital, has said he is in favor of this project. He has nurses and doctors that don't necessarily live here. They're traveling nurses and doctors that are here for 6 months to a year at a time. And this is the type of housing they need. We hear this from a number of employers, that this is the type of housing we need. So we do need housing. We need housing of all different types as well. But that is how we ended up coming down this space, that this was an option that the city had. We own the property. We could control what goes there, whereas we can't do that with privately owned property. And we saw that this was a great opportunity to have some additional housing. I know there were some comments about the scale of it, and I know it's hard to envision a change. This is a huge change for that piece of property, but just right around the corner is Lexington House Apartments. They have over 70 units on 2 acres as well. It is the same scale as it. It's a 3-story building. It looks very nice, and it has landscaping around it. I will say, I actually like the design of the apartments. We're not creating a Disneyland effect. We don't want to create a fake historical presence, and that and I do like the way that it melds with the hospital and has that natural effect. But more importantly, as a planning commission, we've been looking at ways to expand housing in it. So for those of you who are concerned about housing in general, I'd encourage you to keep following the planning commission in the next few months into year, because we're looking at doing having an ordinance for accessory dwellings. Can people build garage apartments? Because we need all types of housing in Lexington, and we're looking at opportunities to expand it.
And while
That
this,
answers your question, but
while this housing may be market rate, this will open potentially affordable housing up for other people. You know, you have WNL students, young professionals living in houses that could be rented or bought by you know, young families. We have an issue here where we do not have housing to really expand the workforce. We don't really have housing to expand the population. If you look at where our housing is currently, I mean, if you look at our population where it is currently, it's plateaued back to the levels it was in the 70s and 80s. And there was a population drop off, and now we've since rebounded. There are not a lot of new housing options. Yes, there's been some built then, but there's some houses that are no longer in service. So if we want to expand our you know, if we want to expand our workforce, you know, for local businesses, if local businesses want to have new customers, we have to find a place where people can live in this community. And this presents an opportunity. It's, you know, it's 62 new units, which will open up other housing opportunities that may be more affordable to other people in the population. So I do think that there are benefits to having this type of housing.
Go,
Yeah,
yeah, please
Yeah,
speak.
no, well, because we're speaking to among ourselves, remember,
Mhm.
not necessarily to.
I like
Go
what
ahead,
you
Matt.
said, about, I hadn't really. Creating affordable housing is not necessarily building housing that. I mean, you can build a housing by having spaces that can be occupied to free up housing that is in its very nature affordable. And so that's a perspective that I hadn't taken. So I thank you for that. There was concern brought up about noise. And we don't have any kind of noise ordinance. I do know that for certain businesses, universities, every morning at a certain time, boom, on comes a fan that you can hear from a long way off, and it's some kind of condenser coil or going over or doing something, and it does create a lot of noise. There's nothing that really, there's no kind of requirement that we can have that to make sure that all these 60 something or 80 something units that are going to go on the ceiling, on the roof, are going to be not create unusual noise. Is that?
As I understand it, we currently only have a noise as a nuisance. So if there's a loud party, you call up the police. Council is working towards a noise ordinance, and I don't recall off the top of my head that discussion if it applied to residential HVAC units. But again, it depends on the decibels and all that. But it's highly unlikely, in my opinion, that the units that are going to be on top of a 3-story building or 4-story building where the noise is largely going up and out is going to be to the point where it's either a nuisance or maybe reach a threshold of whatever that threshold will be in what will be our new noise ordinance.
Okay.
To my fellow commission members, my major issue here is the one of the lot width. Right now, the difference between what is required by our code and what this lot width has is around 230 feet. That's equivalent to 23 units. Because for each unit above 10, you add 10 feet of additional lot width. So if this one was done by code, it would be approximately 39 or 40 units. So I'm really, I don't know what to do. And because I agree with the need for housing. I agree that this site is a suitable site for housing, given its central location. I understand how adjoiners can be upset, would be upset. But ever since I've been on this commission and observed it and city council before, we've stuck to the rules. And that's where I have a dilemma on this one. And quite frankly, it should have been flagged a long time ago. So, and I appreciate, I raised this with Arnie because it was raised with me. And I appreciate how he's offered an alternative in making a decision, which is, are we meeting the conditions, the conditional use permit? So I'd like to hear a little discussion around that. If it's,
What are your thoughts on, do you think it meets the conditional use permit?
generally, yes. I think that the comments we've heard tonight in objection to this, the ones that focus on the comprehensive plan. And yes, we know we can each look at the comprehensive plan and find language that we like and we don't like in there to support a project. I do think the issue of scale and historic character keep coming up. And then together with the fact that if this project did go according to code, it would be essentially 1 story shorter. There's an issue with that because council has entered into this agreement with Mr. Gaskin. And it's probably based on certain, well, it's not our business. That's not what we need to talk about. So just throwing it out there.
I share the similar concern. I think that the question, a lot of the concerns that are raised are a function of the scale of the property, the scale of the project. I also agree. I'm not here to make an aesthetic judgment on what it looks like so much. That can come into play when you talk about historic character. And I think it probably could get to a point where a design could come in that is truly heinous. That could be so far out that it really could raise that aesthetic concern. But that's at my house. I'm not the one who chooses the colors for when we get things painted. So I'm not so much concerned about the aesthetic. I think it's a function of the scale that I think have most people concerned when they talk about traffic in particular, I think is the major thing. In terms of the stormwater and water, I think the safeguards that are in place there are the fact that there are state regulations. There are engineering necessities that have to be taken into account, and they have to be, and they will be. It can't be built without that kind of thing. So I'm not too concerned that we're going to have a swamp down in front. That I don't see as a concern. Or as a deal breaking problem. I think the safeguards are there for that. It is the question of the scale, which comes back to the regulations about the density. And we have 2 different ways of doing the density in the zoning ordinance is what we have. And it could be to say, well, why do we have it that way? It might seem an odd way to do it. Why not just have one? It would be sort of a forensic exercise to go back and say, well, when this was put in, what was the thinking? What was the discussion? Why did we have these 2 different things? And I think basically the question is that we want to make sure that the density fits the property and it doesn't overwhelm it. And that these are 2 ways of looking at it and they're 2 safeguards. So I'm concerned that it came this far. I feel a little chagrined on my own behalf that I didn't bring it up. It was going before city council and we had the different proposals that I didn't think of it, and a lot of people didn't think of it. Is it, how do all these proposals fit with what the regulations are at the moment? And that didn't happen. And it probably should have. I don't like the feeling of feeling too inflexible, that, well, we've got this rule. Is it important enough to stick to it and have everything fall apart in terms of a project? There's an old saying that Cato the Elder, who didn't have many friends and was pretty inflexible, and he used to say, "Let justice be done, though the heavens fall." And that's kind of rigid way to be. And he didn't make a lot of friends that way, but he was basically saying this is what the rule is. So I want to know why we should say, well, we're going to not follow this rule here, where in other instances, I think as John said we have to follow this rule that is there. And I think we had a recent case like that where it was kind of like, this doesn't meet the zoning definitions that we have. So that's where I am on this.
I guess I would say, my feeling is that we do meet the area requirements. I'd be concerned if we didn't, like you said, we have two different measurements of density. I'd be concerned if we didn't meet either of them. We do meet, the total area is enough. We also have to recall, we did sell off part of the property that was originally part of this, and by selling the rah-rah building. And I think in some ways we could have caused part of this problem in a respect, but regardless, I feel good that we have made that. I do feel like we've made other, we've bent the rules a little bit, not totally, but even when we, for me, it was that, the RLC, the property on, Henry Street and Randolph Street, about allowing first floor housing there. We had a compromise, and I see this as a compromise. I don't think this I don't think it changes the density. Again, I feel like we've shown in other places like Lexington House, you can support that number of houses and it is not causing problems. Aesthetically, it looks fine. It is not overwhelming. In fact, I think most people forget those apartments are there and don't, consider them, don't even think that they're 3-story apartments, because it just fits in with the environment, because that's what we're used to. So I personally, because it does meet that square footage, I don't have an issue with it.
Arnie, the two things. One, when we're talking about historical character, do we really even think about that in this zone? It's not near, it's not, we generally think about historical character in different corridors, don't we? I'm just trying to make sure I'm thinking about this correctly. I'm not advocating one way or the other. I just kind of want to know how to think about is that an appropriate for this area?
This property is not in a design district. It's not in the downtown historic district. It's not in a residential historic district, and it's not in an entrance corridor. So you would have review of an entrance corridor for aesthetics, and the architectural review board would in our historic districts, but this property is not in either. So we do not have design standards specifically for this property. Now, there are some general statements certainly in the comprehensive plan that talk about architecture and whatnot that you would generally want to follow. Yes.
The other, you went through your calculus regarding John's comments with frontage or signage, I guess it is. Could you recount what that was again? Because I'm just getting a little confused on this.
Okay, as an example, I'm going to go back a little bit. So for lot area, multifamily dwelling units are supposed to have 10,000 square feet of lot area, and then 1,500 square feet for each unit in excess of 4. And again, that's lot area. The question is more about lot width. Lot width, multifamily are supposed to have 50 feet plus 10 feet for each unit above the 4. And when I did at least that calculation, there's plenty of lot area. But on the lot frontage side, there isn't quite enough. 630 feet roughly is required, and then there's 406.44 feet provided. But as you're considering that, what I would recommend you do, since the lot width seems to be a concern, is that how does that specifically measure up to your conditional use permit criteria? So your conditions of issuance, as an example, the fact that it may be not as wide of a parcel that the zoning ordinance envisioned, how does that adversely affect the health, safety, and welfare of persons residing in the neighborhood? How does having not quite enough lot frontage how is that detrimental to public health, welfare, or is it unduly injurious to property values? How is it in conflict with the policies and principles of the comprehensive plan? So yes, we do have a metric, but how is it affecting those things that I just read so detrimentally that it would not meet the criteria that I just read? It's a bit of an odd criteria, in my opinion. Why could you not have a narrow parcel that's deep and still accommodate multifamily dwelling units, as long as you can accommodate the stormwater, as long as you can accommodate the parking and the other necessities?
So the main thing I'm grappling with is the width requirement. And the reason why is, as some people have stated, some of our previous decisions have been very to the T on, and I see there's a different pathway to this, but that's the one thing where, as planning commission, I don't know if our considerations are different than city council in that respect, because city council could, I don't want to speak on what city council can do, but city council may have an ability to amend. I don't know. So that's my one thing is I hear the explanation. That's my main concern. And that's why I'm a little bit torn here tonight in this capacity.
Could this have been brought forward with a proposal to have an amendment to the zoning? I mean, in other words, could they have said, you know what, this isn't going to fit these two criteria for density? Can we get, people can apply for amending the zoning ordinance? Could it have been brought forward with that? Or could that have been done first?
It certainly could have, but if the applicant asked, what do I need to submit for an application? I would have pointed towards what we have in our code requirements, and it says something to the effect of, you need to provide the application for such conditional use permit shall be accompanied by such written and graphic material as may be necessary to enable the planning commission and the governing body to make recommendation and findings set forth above. So it just is general to the requirements that are in here. I'm not going to say this the correct way or not clearly. So my recommendation, if they would ask me, do I need to make a zoning text amendment to this lot width requirement first? I would have said no, because planning commission, as long as they can make a determination that A, B, C, D are met, as well as that part of number 3, then there's no reason or need to do that first. Now, in hindsight, would it have been cleaner and clearer and easier for you all to have done it that way? Yes, but I have to admit that if the applicant had asked me, I would have said no. The criteria or the conditions for issuance are A, B, C, and D. And then again, in my opinion, for whatever it's worth, is that a lot that is slightly narrower than what's in the requirement, how is that detrimental to those criteria? The impact that we're trying to understand is from the multifamily units. Can a multifamily building not be on something that's narrow and deeper and still be accommodated without violating health, safety, welfare, and the other criteria?
And I don't see that it would make the project better if it did have, the 630 feet of frontage, but was narrower and still had the overall same area. I mean, what does that do for the project? How is that making it any better?
I mean, there's more space to maybe do some of the, I mean,
Are you saying, Leslie, what would the difference be if they just cut the top floor off?
No, I'm saying we are, we're, I don't,
Hypothetically,
When-
if
when-
if the rah building was not there and the city sold the entire lot and they like, then maybe the frontage would be wide enough to accommodate this design.
but the important part is keeping the overall area the same. So not even so much that. What I'm asking is, okay, so if we wanted, ideally, if this had the 630 feet of frontage, but was narrower, a narrow width, do we think the project would be any better? I don't see why. I think your parking would end up actually being a mess. If you're constricting it this way and yet you're trying to get out this way, I don't see that it makes it a better project. If it made it a better project, then I think I would feel like we have to be more strict on both those measurements of density. But I honestly, you're gonna have to explain to me if you see that having 600 feet, yet a skinnier lot would make for a better project.
I mean, let me ask a clarification question. Could we put a condition on it that it complies with the city's width requirements? And then city council can determine what they want to do with the width requirements? Is that a condition we could do?
You could, and I would encourage you, if you're considering any conditions, they have to be reasonably related to the impact. So what is the impact that the width requirement would meet? And is that roughly proportional to the impact that you perceive?
To make sure it's in full compliance.
You have the ability to recommend conditions, yes. And I would recommend, if you're going to do conditions, to according to the criteria that I just read, yes.
But those are conditions for the applicant and not conditions for the city to do right. We're not
In place conditions
Yeah.
on the property, if that's the question. It's not just what the applicant can
Okay.
proffer or offer. But yes, you have the ability to recommend conditions, and city council has the ability to approve this project with additional conditions above and beyond those that are offered.
And I don't want to get too much off topic, but this is an interesting discussion because it was something I wanted to bring up with our R2 frontage requirements as well. In R2, we require, I think, 80 feet of frontage. And so on a piece of property, say you have a cul-de-sac, if you were going to create a cul-de-sac, you would have to have 80 feet of frontage on that little cul-de-sac. You could have a huge, acre parcel, but if you don't get that frontage, you can't build a house there. So we do have other places in our code that we need to look at the frontage requirements. It doesn't necessarily make sense. I think we use frontage, but what we're really talking about is square area that we want. We want to keep a certain lot size. I'm just throwing that out.
Yeah, the only thing that, well, one of the things that I think about is the capacity of those streets, even as is. There, I agree with what a lot of the public has said, that Houston is narrow, Spotswood's fine, is very wide. Preston's narrow, turning from Spotswood Drive left or right onto Nelson Street most times of the day, it's going to be difficult. So but it's mostly just the width of Houston Street, and that's the one thing that concerns me about any sort of major development of that place. But I mean, that there's narrow streets everywhere in Lexington. Jackson is narrow. You have to bob and weave on Jackson. You have to bob and weave everywhere. Most of these thoroughfares. So it's just the topography of Lexington housing that the residential areas that we're in. But I agree with Nick. I thought the same thing. And what Leslie said, the city needs housing. If units are available here, it will create, you know, a trickle effect where people may move into these houses and will free up other places. And in general, good practices for urban and cities is to have more density. That's usually a desirable thing for certain reasons. So I'm not concerned. Yeah, I guess I'm the width thing is, to me, I'm leaning towards with what Leslie and Arnie is saying, is like the area of the lot seems to me more important, whether the actual where the width and the length are. So if it was the fact that, you know, it goes pretty deep, it goes pretty far back, that creates area for more parking. It creates a lot of the units being further away from the street. But it's a technical criteria, but I don't know how that lack of 230 feet would impact the welfare of the safety and welfare of the people of the public.
I mean, would you be objectionable to just having a condition that it complies with city ordinances or city code?
Yeah, what are you proposing? I didn't
mean,
catch it the first time.
Yeah, so just to make a recommendation to approve it on the condition it applies with city ordinances, all city ordinances and code. I don't know if that's redundant, but
then it does, then
then
you're
it
not
can't-
recommending it because it doesn't.
Yeah, it does.
but
do
couldn't, I mean, well, I see, I guess based on the current code.
So is that what are you sort of having, is that sort of your way of having the applicant redesign their density then to fit city code? Like, we would approve it as long as they redesign and get the density down to comply with the width?
Or there was a different density requirement in the city code.
Okay.
So I live on the 500 block of Taylor Street. So I live fairly close. So I'm familiar with the traffic in that area. And I think about how will that affect my life, as a lot of the people who are speaking to us are talking about how will change. So that's on my mind as well. I walk my dog down by Spotswood and it's a nice open green space right now, but it's not a dog park. I don't use it for a dog park, you know, and I'm not against development there. I agree entirely that we need that this is a good goal to have this property developed. And the question of traffic, I'm still not as concerned about that. The bobbing and weaving, I think, as we've seen, is in some ways is safer because you don't have Spotswood is kind of a racetrack at times. People go down Spotswood pretty darn fast because it's a big wide open street. Is it going to slow people down? Yes, there's going to be more congestion. There is, but I'm not convinced that's a deal breaker for this. As John had said, we're not in the business of questioning the business model. I do wonder, and I'm concerned, if we hold the line to the strict letter of the law, will the business model no longer be feasible for the developer to say, I can't cut out 20 units, or it's no longer economically feasible for me, and the whole thing falls through, and we're doing the same thing we've always done with Spotswood, and it's sitting there empty. And I don't want to see that happen. I don't want to see that it'll take another 10 to 12 years for another developer to come along. So it's a really tough thing. I don't think I just don't know. We have the code, we have it there. It's not, does it meet one or the other of these? They're both there. I'm having a hard time getting around that. And all the concerns stem from that. It's a question of scale. That's where.
So maybe we should review what our options are now, because it is tough. Do we take a vote? And because we know the other time we got into a difficult call and it was a much smaller scale issue, it was really for city council to sort out in a way, because that in a way, this goes back to some decisions that city council made, even the number 62. So That's one of the things we could do is just go ahead and assume that we vote as we're going to vote tonight and then see what city council does. I don't know if there's any other workaround on this. I'm happy to hear any other thoughts.
Can I have a concern? I was really swayed by what you had said about the housing and how that could actually free up in an area that we in the comprehensive plan really think is important. But I also have a question for city council. I mean, problem with taking your approach, city council will do whatever they want with what we say, but city council has already indicated that's very invested in this process. So if we just say, oh, it's up to city council without any guidance from us at all, then I think we know what the answer is going to be. It's because they're already, I think they're already, you've gone all the way to this point. You're just trying to hopefully get this planning commission to pass this through, and so that you can go ahead and approve it. I feel like that's the case. Am I wrong?
We want the best project possible. And so that's what it is important that planning commission value it, talk through it completely. So I guess from my standpoint, I would like to hear why it would be a better project if it had the 600 feet of frontage.
Let me
Does that really change it?
ask a clarification question. So since other things we've talked about have been brought up, I'm wondering how, when we followed the letter of the law on the donut shop, how what are some differentiating, you know what I mean? Was that just a different process in terms of, because we were pretty strict about it.
Did you vote in favor of the donut shop or against the donut shop?
I voted against it based on the technical issues with it.
And did you have other concerns that you didn't really think it fit there? That we had noise issues?
My
was
concerns
your
were
only issue?
specifically that it did not meet the letter of the law. So I'm trying to be consistent with my reasoning.
Well, I mean, I can tell you, like, for instance, with bending, when it came to city council on the RLC for the Henry Street and Randolph, I did bend and vote for it because we had gotten to a place where I felt like it was close enough to the intent of the law. But, I do, this is an interesting discussion too, since we just finished doing the PDMU and we're trying to incentivize density. And now, we are meeting pretty much most of the criteria for this.
They're different property. They're different properties.
I'm calling a really hard decision because like affordable housing, I think this helps affordable housing. I'm also have much respect for the law and want to make sure that we cross all the, T's and dot all the I's. So this is a very hard decision. That's why I'm thinking through it out loud.
No, and I understand. I appreciate that.
So I'm going to follow up on what John said. I think we're hearing a lot of the angst and the concern and which way to vote properly, and it's going to go to city council. And I think city council is going to want to hear what each one of us has to say. I've always felt confident that city council listens to us, especially if we speak unanimously, they really listen. And if we speak divided, then they take that into account as well. So I would suggest that a motion be put on the table and each one of us can say why we're going to vote the way we're going to vote, if you feel comfortable, and just take it to a vote. City council are the ones who
I'll just add this. Thank you, Pat. I'll just add one thing that before we vote, there's the opinion I need to get out there again is this is intended for young professionals, students walking to Kroger, walking downtown for drinks, walking to campus. I really hope the city, if this plan does go through, regardless of what our decision is, the city really needs to focus on this being an area where they shore up and make very nice pedestrian and bike walkways, especially if these units, not everyone's going to be, it's not, not maybe there's going to be one car for two people. And so some people are walking around Safety is important. I think that's on the city. It sounds like that's not on the developer to improve the sidewalks and the walkways and the sharrows and the bike lanes. But Preston Street is very narrow. Nelson gets very busy at certain times of the day. So that's just one thing I want to make sure that the city, the planner, people that have the ability to make that decision if something's safe or traffic will be impacted. There's definitely it could be a lot of improvements on Houston Street, getting from this area to the core of the city.
Good point.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, may I make one comment? A little bit of a distinction, at least in my mind, between this and what happened to the donut shop. Donut shop had a definition and there was a hang up in that definition that didn't really allow it. Here we have two definitions, if you will, or two ways of calculating density. One is by lot area and it clearly meets that. And the other calculation we have is by lot width. So it's not as though there's
So would you say that
particular-
there's ambiguity in the law based on density? So there's ambiguity,
you have two calculations, one it meets and one it doesn't. Which is
creates
different.
ambiguity in the code. Okay. All right. And then this, even though, so since there's ambiguity in the code, then we have this to follow as a template to see whether or not, and by this, I mean the conditional use permit, to determine how we should proceed based upon the ambiguity in the code.
Correct. I would always
For density.
point you towards the criteria.
Okay. All right. I'm ready to vote.
I do like what Leslie said about the intent, because there's this ambiguity, what to be guided by, the notion that you could have or what you had said, a narrow lot that goes deep. And so this is following, it's out of line with one of the definitions, but it's in keeping with the other one, and it's the general sense it's achieving the overall goal. So
John, prior to a vote and just saying vote like this, we have the opportunity to add additional conditions. And I know that things that you're passionate and I agree with are things about green infrastructure and, tree canopy and things like that. Do you feel like that there are conditions that should be met that more strictly, that more, keep people more accountable to making sure that those goals of the city are being reached with this development, or are you fine just voting as is without adding additional conditions?
Well, based on our earlier discussion with Arnie, when I went to see him this week, again, it's this whole question of how much latitude we have to, and I think that the conditions here, the intent is there in terms of the trees and green canopy and the green infrastructure. And a lot of that is just needs additional engineering work. So the intent is there. The issue for me, again, Leslie, I would put it another way, is the difference is that this project, if this had been flagged early, would be maybe 40 units, one floor less. Because mind you, I'm not against this site being developed. I've been consistent. As a matter of fact, I've been the one who early on, anyway, no need to go into history. So that's another way to look at it. And this goes back to what Pat and I were saying, is that the scale would be reduced if we followed that condition. So
I mean, I would just want to clarify, this wasn't really an oversight, was it? This was something that we had actually, because you and I had talked about this quite a while ago, but it was because we have plenty of area that it's seemed like that this wasn't an issue, that you could, like you said, with the ambiguity in the code, it clearly met the criteria for having enough square footage. So I don't want,
No, it's
Am I
not.
correct in saying that, are you, that this is
My
not a
oversight, not
surprise
including
oversight?
it again in the conditional use permit, but it was provided to council when you were considering the 4 different proposals from the
Yeah.
2 different groups. So there was a zoning analysis done at that point that provided that information. Yes.
John, do you have the same understanding that there's ambiguity in the code and those are two
Yes, I
separate
agree.
definitions?
Yes, I mean, because it does meet the density requirement
Okay.
to the max.
Okay, any further discussion or do we want to, someone want to make a motion?
Nope, I'll make one.
Yeah,
I move to approve
Leslie's already said-
conditional use permit number CUP 2023-01 to allow the construction of up to 62 multifamily units on the subject parcel, and development must be in substantial compliance with the 11 conditions offered by the applicant in the project narrative and in substantial compliance with the concept plan Lexington multifamily dated October 21st, 2022 as submitted.
I'll second, just to hear the discussion.
Second to approve. I feel more comfortable voting to approve, knowing that there's 2 separate definitions and there's ambiguity in the code, because I do think we need this in the city because we need affordable housing. And although this is not great affordable housing itself, it opens up affordable housing so that we can have, places for people to live, because we have a deficit in housing in the city and we need places for people to live, to have a healthy workforce and to have a healthy economy.
I'm going to second what you said. I think that that's really swayed me in terms of all the considerations. That because of the affordable housing issue, and that has been a big emphasis in our discussions in the planning commission over the last several months. This is one way that can indirectly have an effect. So
I think the premise is correct. I would not use the word affordable housing.
We need housing
We
because we
need
have a housing
housing and you're
deficit.
freeing up housing
Freeing up
stock,
housing,
which is market rate. It's not,
Sure.
has nothing to do with affordable housing.
but it will make more housing options available, some of which will be affordable,
Mhm.
probably, most likely.
Probably not.
Why don't,
but we-
I
we
would,
can
I would
argue about that.
disagree, but
That's-
Yeah, I agree with you, Nicholas. I mean,
okay.
If a student is vacating a rental house on Randolph Street that because they want a more, maybe a nicer house, you are freeing up a lower, a more affordable property on Randolph Street, just as a hypothetical example. Yes, I think, just creating more inventory of housing in the city. There will be some influx of new people coming to Lexington, but there's going to be a reshuffling of current residents that are going to move into this property or move around. And I think that overall it's a positive. Again, I challenge the city to integrate this area and connect it more to make it more connected to in a safe way for pedestrians, bicyclists, electric vehicle type things, that just to avoid people feeling they need to drive from Spotswood to Park Downtown, things like that. Keep going.
I wholeheartedly agree with what was said about why we need housing and how it'll have an effect on the housing stock in the city. My concern still remains about the question of density, and it's the same concern I had at watching the whole process unfold from the beginning of the discussion of what will be developed there, which was the question of scale, which was some of the difference, I think, between the Spotswood Collaborative and this proposal. So I still have that concern about the scale and keeping to our zoning.
Keeping to what? What was that?
Keeping to our zoning, keeping to that zoning rule.
Are we ready to vote? All right, so we have motion for approval and seconded.
Voice vote.
You want to do a roll call here?
Oh, yeah, we can do a roll call. Matt Suckler,
I'll vote yes.
John Driscoll,
I'll vote no.
Nick Betts,
I vote yes.
Pat Bradley,
I vote no.
Leslie Strong,
Aye.
and I vote yes. Okay. So that's 4-3-1, or is it 3-3?
Two.
4-2.
4-2. Okay. Math is hard. All right.
We used to have seven. We did.
Okay. Great. All right. So that closes that item of business. And for time, I'm going to take a look at the agenda. I'm going to push that we move item B to a January meeting.
Postpone it to a time certain, unless there's thing.
Can I make just one quick statement?
Yeah.
We intended this to be the initial review of that anyway. So it was background information. We knew we weren't really going to get to it this year. So if there are any questions as you're reading through that, just let us know and we'll put it on the next available agenda in January.
And the material was very helpful and
Yeah.
what you all put together was
Yeah,
great.
well
So
done.
thank you on that. And that's going to help get this.
Okay.
Well organized too. Thank you for that.
All right. Item C. This is probably business we should do get to. Electing a vice chairperson. My understanding is Nick Betts, you have requested to step down as vice chairperson. We don't.
Yes, sir. Based on my understanding that city council people, which I will be as of next month, do not generally hold that role. So I'm not sure
Okay.
whether I'll be on the commission or not, but
Okay. With that said, does anybody want to nominate anybody else?
I nominate Matt as vice chair because it's been a long time since he's been in the. I came 6 years ago. You were chair. It's time to cycle.
In this case, I'm the old man. You are the youngin. You're the youngster. You're the youngster because Pat and I, Blake's already there. So Pat and I, you're the youngster.
Yeah, John, you haven't ever served as,
He's done
oh,
president
you did serve as chair, but you didn't. serve
and
as-
vice
But
chair.
you were vice chair when
He was vice chair.
I've
I told him everything he knows.
That's right.
been trained as vice chair.
Matt, can you give us a real strong reason why you really do not feel like doing it? If it's something that would be burdensome, let us know. Because we would love to bully you into it, but not in a serious way.
I just don't know realistically with what I know is going on next term. It's going to be how should we say, difficult term. So, but
Well, here's
I
another.
get it. As long as Blake is
It's going to show up
closer.
every meeting.
Yeah.
I mean,
Your term is.
I'm not asking the vice chairperson, go home and study housing policy for hours on end.
I mean, surely though, I may have to miss a meeting or two. I can anticipate, so that's fine. I'll do it. And then I rotate off. I'm off the planning commission
In
July, yeah.
in July. I mean,
So stopgap measure. Okay.
What?
So stopgap measure then if you're not going to re-up for the whole.
I've re-upped.
This is just
Okay.
once.
Okay.
No, I mean.
Okay. So do we need a second for his nomination or does it just go to a vote?
Yeah, I did
Matt would know
first.
things like that.
I'm
Again.
quickly forgetting.
we have a motion. We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Matt Tuckler, vice chairperson.
Do we get in?
How
Did he vote?
happy.
Do you abstain?
You owe me.
All right. Item D, review planning commission terms. Do we want to just very quickly I think Matt just said his term's ending July 2023. My term ends July 2023.
Does it?
Does it?
Yes, yeah. So we have,
And I hope you guys will stay on, but we also have to recruit for two other positions on here as well. The one open spot and either Nick or I will not be on this coming up in January. So we do regardless need to recruit. And I think we're probably the best recruiters and You know, we can have some conversation about what skill sets, but we need some people.
Yeah, I mean, the strength of this planning commission has been the ability for us to debate and have these discussions and learn and know what we need to know. And so I'm concerned that if there's a big change, then we won't have people that are familiar enough with the issues. So it's a little bit like an organization thinking of succession planning. I think we need to be thinking ahead that way. Because we're
Until 2024, right?
yeah, you're 24, so you and you're one more year, no, 2024. Unfortunately for everybody.
I don't have any other hobbies, so I'm staying.
25, so.
That's a good observation to make. Just because it says end date doesn't mean you can't re-up.
Right.
4-year term, 12-year term.
All right, so that's in mind. Yeah, absolutely. We need to strengthen and recruit.
I think this is more informational. John requested it at the last meeting, so we provided it. So it's, I guess, just informational to point out when the terms are and to think about succession and recruiting.
So I thought when you said planning commission terms, I thought you meant like, are we cool or not? But I guess no.
I wouldn't
It's
know.
actually
Cool.
turn
right.
how you refer to planning commissioners.
Okay, let's move on. John, do you want to do the green infrastructure update?
Given the hour, I'll give a 30-second update.
30 seconds, we got it.
We are meeting as a group next week. I've been in touch with WNL and VMI to try to get a sense of where they would like to fit into the plan as it is. And we're working on also discussing where or who would be the most qualified to be a backbone organization. What are some of the criteria for that? So the hope is that we'll have all that in place for our January 12th meeting, and we can consider it there. So we would have narrowed down the priorities, have a further discussion on the backbone organization, find out a little bit more about WNL and VMI's interests, and any changes then we make to the document, which we can all look at and approve or not in January. So that's and I would still, if any of you have comments on the draft, happy to receive them.
Great, thanks, John. All right, let's move to other business. Can we get a very brief zoning report?
I'm willing to skip it if you want.
Oh, this is actually some of the most interesting
Yeah, I
stuff that
think so
happens in
too.
the city. So, yeah, but
Planning commission. One notice of violation was issued for advertising an unpermitted short-term rental, and this reaches back a couple of meetings because I didn't put one together at the last meeting, so this goes back at least a month. 3 notices of violation for unmaintained properties. 1 notice of violation was issued for unpermitted signs at stop-in. The local board of building code appeals did meet, and they reaffirmed the building officials' determination for the university chapel. Attended a number of training sessions, 1 for floodplain ordinances, 1 for bike ped designs, 1 for the fall housing workshop, and a mixed use on Main Street, as well as a WIP, which is a watershed improvement program meeting that the CSPDC had. Also appeared in court for a return date for a violation at 711 Thornhill Road. In that case is scheduled for January 12th.
great, thank you. Gonna skip catalyst project updates and annual.
Can I forgot to say something on the green.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Just, I wanted to thank the News Gazette
Yeah.
for a very good article on the green infrastructure. So thank you for that. It helps in getting everyone else to understand it.
All right, how about a city council report, Leslie?
Just 2 quick items. Council did approve the telecommunications ordinance regarding the small cell towers. And then we had a group of JMU students report on their housing study. You know, they noted the need that we do need more housing. And one of the main areas they kind of hit on was we should review our ordinances to see if we're being too strict within our zoning and prevent housing. Like with frontage perhaps, you know. Something to think about. And I think we actually have made great progress, we're on the right track, haven't talked about the PDMU and now doing the accessory dwellings and cottage housing, looking at different options. Doesn't mean we'll approve all of them, but we're exploring all options to increase housing.
When is the housing study coming in, Arnie? When will we see the first?
CSPDC just sent around something and I'm gonna try to remember, paraphrase the best I can. Initial reports for the different subregions, I think we're gonna come out in the spring of 2023. And if I'm not mistaken, the final report is still in 2024. So the next we'll see are some initial reports or for the subregions.
Because it might be useful in next year for us to put on our agenda a discussion about it. I've been talking to others about the housing issue, and as came out tonight, it's multidimensional. It's about increasing the housing stock, accessory stock and the accessory dwellings. But and then it's also looking at, is there a way to provide more direct affordable housing? So it's not just one or the other, it's all of those pieces coming together. Even someone suggested to me that if the university, WNL requested that students go, if they built more housing on campus, that would free up units in the city. So we can think about different, there's lots of, again, it's multidimensional and it would just be good to get all these ideas out on the table.
I think though, just for clarify, I think that it's only seniors and law students that don't live on campus.
Right. So it's like
But
300.
that's one of the parts of their master plan was more housing. That was that I don't know the
In the
timeline,
city.
but
Yeah, they want, yeah.
anyway, just to add to the hypothetical, I feel like they've explicitly said in their master plan they want to build more housing on campus. Okay, let's adjourn.
Second.
Motion.
Aye.
Let me ask you a question, because I have to have a second, because I have to run the restroom. And then.
See you on the way out.
Y'all have a great holiday.
Thank you very much, Nick.
Forgot to say thank you, Nick.
Yeah.